I always assumed as a police wife, the threat to my husband was in the field, right? I always thought that's where the danger was. And this experience has shown me that, the war on cops is real. I don't think that's anything new, but what I've learned through this experience is that war on cops is now, I think, expanded to weak command leadership, to city leaders with a political agenda, to politicians, with this anti-cop rhetoric. So I would say my view on policing has changed in that way, and that my eyes are wide open as a police wife, that the threat is all around us.
Yo, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of the It's Needed Podcast, where we discuss real issues involving law enforcement in the community. It's your boy Ryan Tillman, founder of Breaking Barriers United, and I am joined today by the light-skinned wonder himself, Mr. Oh No, it's the Popo. How you doing, Brody? He freeze on us? See, his internet is already acting up.
Christine, you're gonna realize that his internet is kind of iffy. So,
well, first of all,
go in and out.
First of all, it's not. That was your internet over there, but we're already having internet issues from AJ's side. It's okay. Columbus, Ohio.
5 seconds in. That's great.
So, anyways, don't worry about it.
It's always funny when we have a guest because Ryan will be mid-conversation and just stop, and then it's just like me and the guest, like, I don't know. So what you want to talk about?
It won't sound like this, the actual audio version, so don't worry. But AJ did mention that we have a guest. So, Christina, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So it's a pleasure to have you on as well. We also have the Savage himself, looking all slim and tender over there himself, Mr. Billy, the Savage.
I had a relapse last night. and I binged at Jack in the Box.
Oh, yeah. Jack! Oh, you got real dirty with it, huh?
I did. When going to bed, I thought I was going to slip into a coma.
Let me ask you.
Did that tear your stomach up?
Not bad yet.
Not bad yet.
Keyword.
What did you have from there?
I had the sourdough Jack, 4 tacos, and a milkshake.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, so, hey, but we're back on it today. Life goes on.
You know the funny thing about
you just
that?
Jumped off the deep end.
Oh, well, like around 6 p.m. I was like, I'm doing it tonight. It's going down.
The funny thing though is you could tell in his voice and his inflection that he was already thinking about, like, man, I'm gonna get a sourdough Jack, 4 tacos.
I was dreaming about my meal. Like I was like this. I was imagining it before I had it. So.
Oh my goodness, that's bad.
Okay, all right then. Well, Godspeed to you, Billy.
Yeah, man. Real quick on the subject of food, and Christina, you'll learn here quickly that I am a foodie, a very bad foodie, but whatever. So I went to McDonald's last night, right? And so I went to McDonald's. I put this. No, this was for my kids. I don't really eat McDonald's if I do want to do something real dirty with it. Whatever, bro. Whatever. What, you gonna call CPS on me because I gave McDonald's to my kids?
Yes, I am.
My son was pleading with me, so I was at Panda Express on one end. I waited freaking like 20 minutes just to get through the line there. And then I went to my oldest son was like, Dad, I want McDonald's. Like, whatever. I don't like dealing with it tonight, so I'll go to McDonald's. So anyways, my kids are very picky eaters. My oldest son, he's like, hey, Dad, I want a cheeseburger with just the cheese, like no tomatoes, no mustard, no onions, just cheeseburger with just the cheese, right? I'm like, all right, cool. Okay. So I'm in the line and I order, hey, and I already know my son, so I'm like, hey, give me 2 cheeseburgers, just the cheese, just cheese only. That's all I want. So he's like, Dad, like, did you tell him like to put meat in the bun too? I'm like, buddy, it's okay. It's a cheeseburger with just cheese. Like, so chill out. He's like, Dad, like, no, tell him to put meat in the bun. I'm like, no, like, chill out. It's all good. So anyways, fast forward to 5 minutes later, I get my bag. I got my Panda on one end. I got the McDonald's on the other end. We drive home. We're good. We're good. I'm like, okay, cool. Got the kids. Kimberly had already got my other 2 children out of the shower and everything like that. So we're about to eat. So then I'm upstairs. My oldest son, Grayson, is downstairs. And he's like, Dad. I'm like, what? He's like, they only gave me cheese and no meat. I'm like, what?
No, they did not.
He's like, see, that's why I told you. That's why I told you, Dad, to tell him to put meat in the bun. So then I go talk to my wife. My wife was like, yeah, you should have just ordered a plain cheeseburger. Like, you have to tell him to put the meat. And I'm like, wait, that does not make any sense. I was like, this is so dumb to me. I was like, this does not make any sense to me. I was like, a cheeseburger insinuates that you want meat in a bun. That's not. So then I posted.
That's the burger aspect of it. Yeah.
Yes, that's the burger aspect. So I was like, so Kimberly was like, no, you're wrong, whatever. Like, cause I guess because my wife orders stuff all the time for him, so she knows. Like, she's already gone down this road, I'm assuming. So, anyways, long story short, I went on.
So wait, time out though. I need clarification. They legit gave you 2 buns with a piece of cheese.
With a piece of cheese. I'm like, last time I checked, this was a grilled cheese. Last time I checked, this was a grilled cheese, not like a regular. So anyway, so I was hot. I was a little mad to say the least. So anyways, I went on Instagram. I was like, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask the rest of the world what they think, because maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it's just me. So I went on and I did a little survey. I said, what does a cheeseburger with just cheese mean? A, grilled cheese, or B, a patty with only cheese, right? So these were the results. I had 7,000 people see this. And out of these 7,000 people, 1,109 people said it means a patty with only cheese. But 621 people said grilled cheese. So I'm like, what? Whoa. I'm like, did I miss something here? Like, did I lose? Like, because 620 of y'all out there think that it means a grilled cheese. So there's some issues out there. So anyways, I'm going to show y'all. This is what my child's bun looked like last night.
That is not real, bro.
Oh, no, that was real. Real as ever.
There's no way.
So at least I know. Now, let me ask you, another mom out there. Or do you have kids, Christina?
Not yet. No, we're newlyweds, so eventually.
Well, congratulations.
But I'm an auntie.
Oh, okay, cool.
Well,
I'm over here throwing motherhood on people. My bad. So let me ask you though: is that mean a grilled cheese or meat with the bun on it, or meat with, or meat in your bun?
That means a plain cheeseburger. I feel like the two are synonymous.
Okay, yeah. So so what I said. Yes. All right, cool. Sounds great. What about you, Billy?
I agree. It really just depends on how you said it, but I think.
I'm telling you, I said a cheeseburger with just cheese.
Yeah, there's meat and cheese there. There's meat and cheese.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So I'm not crazy because I was like, no, this is going to be the great debate. So, anyways, that's how I started my week off, to say the least, guys. My son was upset that I got him a grilled cheese, whatever. I was like, I didn't order grilled cheese, son. I promise you, I would. If you want a grilled cheese, I would order grilled cheese, but. Anyways, to say the least, that's kind of how my week has been going. And then there's been a lot going on in the world lately. Obviously, we got fires, as always, in California. So, my prayers and thoughts go out to all the firefighters out there battling these fires. Afghanistan is been, all of our, according to most people, all of our troops are home. But there's still a lot of people out there that are Americans and stuff like that. So, that's a crazy situation. And then, too, the last thing I want to get into before we get into our guest today, because I don't want to take anything away from her, is I got a few emails about last week's podcast, which was great, and I got to respond to them. But one of the emails actually came from a medical doctor. And so, he was a little upset with the podcast because he said I was leading people astray with this whole idea of vaccines and not vaccines, and I'm not gonna lie, he does give an interesting perspective because he's inside the medical room, so he sees the people come in, and it's almost, I got a taste of my medicine from the standpoint of people always trying to tell officers what to do without actually having the real experience. So I agree with that person that sent me the email, and if you're listening to this next episode, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you reaching out. I'm going to try to get back to you. I've been crazy busy, but I'm definitely going to try to get back to you. But at the same time, I still do stand with my initial decision that it's everybody's choice to how they want to go throughout life, because it's a slippery slope. And when you start taking things away from decisions away from people, then you can look at other countries and see what happens when you don't allow choice. And so
I had the same thing happen this weekend. I was at a festival and a couple walked up to me and they were like, "Oh, hey, we love the podcast." Well, the guy was talking to me in his female half, was just kind of like not off to the distance, but just not really like talking. So I introduced myself to her, and she was like, "Oh, I know who you are," and I was like, "Ooh, that didn't sound good." And she's like, "I listen to the podcast." She's like, "I'm a social worker," and I was like, "Oof." I was like, and she was actually the one who wrote the letter that you read, Ryan. I don't remember the exact letter, but she wrote a letter about something that I said, and Ryan, you read it during the podcast. And she was like, you redeemed yourself the next episode, but it was great because we had a conversation. I learned from it, and that's the beauty of the podcast. And
how long ago was that?
I mean, it had to be probably a few months.
Was it a positive or negative letter?
I'm guessing it was like a letter coming at me, like, you
Okay.
know, AJ need to check himself before he wrecked himself type of deal. But it was cool because, you know, we had like a really good conversation after that. So if either one of you are listening to this, you know, I admit fault in that one.
Well, and here's the thing though, too. It all comes down to this, is that's the beauty of humanity, is we all have freedom to think and view things how we want to. The problem that we're getting when it comes to humanity is we're taking the voice away from people. We're not allowing people to share their sides of the story. And then if you do allow them to share their side of the story, if it's not what you want to hear, then you completely write people off. And so, you know what, if you've been following us for a while, the great thing about, well, I saw you. Y'all froze up, not me. The beauty about this podcast is that sometimes you're not going to always agree with us, but for those of you guys that keep sticking around and rocking with us, I appreciate that, because that's how we all grow and learn. So me and AJ and Billy, we read these comments, we see them, and if we mess up, we'll admit fault. But if we feel a certain type of way or still feel passionate about something, we're going to tell you that. But it doesn't mean I'm going to look at you any differently. And so yeah, I wanted to bring that up before we get into today's guest, and that kind of goes right. It's a good transition for today's guest because I've met you, Christina, online, just how we all met. I met AJ online. It's crazy how this new world is. You know, side note, if you guys are on Netflix, there's a really good series out there called Clickbait. It's about social media. Well, anyways, check it out. It's a good one. Squirrel. But I met Christina on social media. Her husband was involved in a situation, almost a year and a half ago now, probably. Right around the time, I think it was right after the George Floyd situation, if I'm not mistaken. And it brought a lot of controversy around the situation, which I've watched the whole encounter that he had with the subject, and to me, when I watched it, it didn't look like anything different than officers deal with on a day-to-day basis. But because of the environment at the time, but because of everything that was going on with all this social justice and everything, a lot more attention was put on the situation, garnered a whole bunch of unwanted attention, and it was blown, if you ask me, it was blown up into something that it should have never been blown up to. So I invited Christina on this podcast because, one, I just got to give you the credit. I don't know if you hear this, you probably do hear it all the time, but one, I got to give you the credit for sticking by your man, for standing up for him, for going on this mission. I'm sure he tells you this all the time, but I want you to know, as an officer and being married to a beautiful bride, a lot of times you guys don't get the credit that you guys deserve for being the strong support staff that we need. I mean, it's already stressful jobs as it is, the things that we deal with, but nobody sees the side of the side from the spouse. Because you guys have to put up with our nonsense. You guys, it's not just your husband going through an investigation, you're going through an investigation. It's not just your husband that's being probed, you're being probed. It's not just the financial hardships with your husband, it's the financial hardships with you, whatever it may be. So I just want to give you that credit before we even get started, because I know what you're doing it takes a lot of courage and strength to do. And so I give you that credit. And so now, with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Christina. Introduce yourself, tell our audience who you are, and then tell them why you're here.
Yes. Well, hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be on here today. My name is Christina Dages. I'm married to Matthew. And like you just touched on, Ryan, last year, just 2 days after the George Floyd incident, my husband was involved in a very routine law enforcement contact that resulted in a low-level use of force, which was cleared, but it did go viral in a video. So a bystander brought out their cell phone, and we all know how that goes. And the video of the low-level use of force was posted online with the hashtag George Floyd. And so it got a lot of traction. And again, those viral videos are dangerous because they're completely devoid of context, situational detail. And so often these people online with no law enforcement knowledge or training or tactics, they kind of rush to make decisions. They rush to, assassinate someone's character or an officer's character just for wearing the badge. So that's kind of in short what happened to us. That video touched off a use of force investigation, like I said, that cleared my husband, but there were protests and riots in response to that video and just the larger climate around policing. So the city where he worked, where he served, essentially burned to the ground. And the city leaders there were terrified, not really prepared to deal with that type of civil unrest. And so they kind of resorted to clearing him for use of force, but trying to railroad him and force him out for political reasons so that they could kind of quiet the mob. So our lives the last 16 months have been like a hellfire acid bath, it feels like. So my husband was fired and then criminally charged earlier this year with a felony count of falsifying a police report, all again for a use of force, very low level, that was justified. So I've kind of taken it upon myself as a police wife to speak out and to set the record straight about what happened, and also to kind of fact check this false narrative that's been allowed to perpetuate about him for the last year. And it's, we can dive into this later. It's, of course, I'm advocating for justice and victory in our case, but I really do feel like what's happening to us is, really an attack on law enforcement officers and families across the country. And so that's kind of why I want to speak out, is to help educate and empower other law enforcement families so that what we're going through, this constant agony, doesn't happen to anyone else.
Oh my goodness. That is, to say the least, it's traumatic. I mean, you guys are going through so much. And so if you don't mind, Christina, just to give a little context, what I want to do is I want to kind of unpack this thing step by step, so that way we can walk our audience through, from the time it started to what happened in the middle and where we're at now. And we'll obviously we can't give the full version, so that way we can't go 3 hours. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we lay out context, because I think it's important for our listeners to understand. So what was the call for service, if you don't mind, that your husband went on?
Yes. So it was actually a trolley enforcement detail that he was assigned to work with other officers from La Mesa Police Department. So like I said, it was May 27th last year. So just 2 days after George Floyd, and officers were there on a special detail directed by the department, because the trolley station where this all took place is a very high crime area in the city. So Matthew and his colleagues were there to contact everyone, check trolley fares, right? That was their purpose. So it was during a consensual encounter. Matthew detained a subject for not having a trolley pass on MTS property, which is exactly what they're there to do. And so it was during that detention that the subject refused to cooperate. They would not provide their identification. They attempted to walk away during a detention. They struck Matthew, admittedly, and that's on body-worn camera footage, and then they resisted arrest. So while this was all going down and the subject was aggressively resisting Matthew, Matthew went hands-on with him to keep him in a seated position until other officers arrived. So like I said, the bystander video of just that hands-on portion of their interaction went viral. It led to the use of force investigation, which cleared Matthew, but as I touched on earlier, for political reasons, city leaders still tried to make Matthew the scapegoat for the riots, essentially, that happened in their city. So essentially what they did was they tried to take issue with trivial word choice in his police report as like a loophole to allege officer dishonesty. And you're both very experienced law enforcement officers, so you know that is a kiss of death to your career. That's a very serious allegation. So that's what they leaned into, despite Matthew being cleared for use of force, and despite every observation that he wrote in his police report was corroborated by other officers and witnesses for the investigation. But as you both know, like, that type of allegation is taken very seriously, and it allowed them to move forward with forcing him out, railroading him, and kind of bowing to these mob demands. Because when the video went viral, it touched off, there was a larger protest planned in San Diego for George Floyd. And then Matthew's video went viral, and they moved the protest location to La Mesa. So that devolved to looting and arson and violence. And the mob, they demanded that Matthew be fired and criminally charged for assault. And so you kind of see the city burns down. This is a very small, quiet, sleepy city. Nothing like this has ever happened there. The city leaders are terrified, and they kind of like bow to these demands by finding any way possible to fire Matthew. So they fired him and they criminally charged him just like the mob demanded that they do. So that touched off like, it's been almost 16 months now of just absolute agony for our family. All for, like we keep talking about, it's always important to bring it back to low level use of force. That was clear.
And that's where I want to, and that's kind of where I wanted to go. Let's start from there. So if you're a listener to this, if you're not in law enforcement, I'm going to educate you just on the difference between a consensual and a detention, just so that way you know, because I think that's an important foundation for us to understand where we can get into using force and where we can. So Christina said that obviously her husband was doing a specific detail. And what does that mean is like, and AJ knows this too, sometimes you're assigned to do a specific job. So there's grants that come out all the time to say, hey, we have a grant for traffic enforcement. So today, all we're going to do is nothing but traffic enforcement. And it may be as specific as bicycle enforcement. It can be as specific as DUI enforcement, but there's always different assignments that people are set out to do. And so it sounds like her husband was on a detail specifically for trolley fares. So that's what they do, is they go out there and find and see if people have legitimate paperwork to be riding trolleys, if I'm not mistaken. And so during that, you're going to have consensual encounters, which is an officer goes and initiates something on their own, meaning like they don't really have any type of probable cause to stop or detain somebody initially. But a consensual encounter can turn into a detention very quickly for many different reasons. I mean, I can go, for example, if I just saw Billy walking down the side of a road and I go walk up to him, I say, hey, what's going on, Billy? And I see Billy got the sweats going on, and it's not meat sweats from his Jack in the Box, but it's just sweats that are consistent with somebody utilizing a controlled substance, drugs. Then I now turn that consensual encounter, which was me just saying what's up to Billy, into a detention, which means he is no longer free to leave because I found some type of probable cause to detain him. And so in this situation, it sounded like her husband goes to talk to this person. He finds probable cause right away to detain him. And at that moment in time, anytime you're detained by an officer, you have a legal obligation to stop and listen to the commands of what that officer is telling you to do until he either tells you you're free to leave, or he either places you under arrest to go to jail. But you are not free to just do whatever you want to do at that moment in time. So when that happens, when an officer is faced with a situation where they have a consensual encounter that escalates to a detention, and I give somebody a lawful order to stop doing what they're doing, if they continue to do what they're doing, then now we have to make a decision of what we're going to do as the officer. What type of use of force am I going to do? Am I going to draw a taser out and I'm going to pull a baton out? Am I going to pepper spray? Or am I going to use controlling force, which is just me utilizing my hands to stop you from moving and going forward? And a lot of times that level of force is dictated by the actions of that person. Do they pose a deadly threat? Are they reaching in their waistband? Do they have a gun? Do they have a bulge? So those are all things that we have to think and think rapidly or quickly in order to make that decision. I bring that up because Matthew chose to use one of the lowest levels of force, which we call controlling force, which is I put my hands on you and stop you from moving. And so that's a really, really good thing, because it's not like he escalated the situation and pulled out a taser or a gun. Even if he would have pulled out a taser, probably would have been justifiable because you have a person that's not complying with commands. But he chose to utilize controlling force, which is he used his hands after he had already been pushed by this person, right? Is that correct, Christina? Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so he's being pushed by the person. So now you have another crime, which is assault on a peace officer. So now this person is now you have enough probable cause to take this person to jail. So you really can't leave at this point in time. So I bring all that up to say, and AJ, you can tap in on this too, but as a foundation is, what do we have? You have a person that was being detained. He refused to comply with the commands of the officer. He actually assaults the officer. Officer goes to place him in handcuffs, and he's struggling. And ultimately, Officer Degas, how do you pronounce the last name? Degas?
So it's like Vegas, the city, but with the D.
Okay, perfect.
Degas.
Yeah, so Officer Degas goes and he successfully apprehends him until his partners arrive. But because this was captured on video, And I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to address the elephant in the room, because this Officer Degas was a white male and the person he was dealing with was a black male. This thing completely blew up. It completely blew up, because I guarantee you, if the roles were reversed, if it was a white male and the officer was probably black, I don't know if we would ever even heard about it. And we have to address that. And for those of you listening to this podcast, if this irks you or gets underneath your skin that I brought that up, I'm sorry, but that's just the world we live in. A lot of things are changed by the color of our skin nowadays, no matter, on both ends, on both sides of it. There's been people unrightfully stopped because of the color of skin by officers. But on the flip side of that, there's a lot of officers that are facing criticism that they shouldn't be facing simply because they're white and the person they're dealing with is black or Hispanic, another minority. So am I right in saying that, AJ?
No, you are. And this is like an extremely frustrating conversation for me to have, because as you and Billy know, Ryan, and Christina, you may or may not, I've had a video of me using force that went viral a few years ago. And, it led to protests at my house, protests at my church, flyers with my picture, my wife's picture, our address, where she works, passed out about various neighborhoods throughout the city, more specifically around the area where I worked. And I've kind of always had this mentality of just write it out. It will be okay. But in having this short conversation with you, it seems like it's not okay right now, right? Like, it seems like they just continue to turn the heat up, and the way that you described it was a hellfire acid bath. So I already knew that we were in for a doozy, just by you describing that. So it's just frustrating to hear, because up until this point, anytime someone's asked my advice on a situation like that, it's always been in a nutshell, like, hey, like the storm will pass. It will be okay. And I still do believe that in the long run, but it's very hard to have that conversation when you're going through the thick of it, that you are now. And just to kind of touch a little bit more on what you were saying, Ryan, I spoke to the new officers, so not the new recruits, but like a new class that just graduated and they're on probation, where I work, about just mental health and our peer assistance team and whatnot. And during this class, we have a very real raw conversation. And we talked about another officer where I work whose use of force went viral, a white officer using force on a black individual. And one of the newer black officers raised his hand. He's like, it just makes me sick to my stomach, because if you look around the room, a majority of these officers are white, but what most people don't know is the majority of these officers are good people. And unfortunately, if they are caught using force on someone that looks like me, it's 1,000 times more likely to go viral, to where if I'm caught using that same amount of force, you'll never hear about it. He was absolutely right. So, man, this is frustrating to hear.
And that's a reality. I in my own use of force that I had, my officer involved shooting a few years ago. That's what my attorney brought up. She said, hey, one of the things that's also at play here is you're a black guy and the guy that you shot at was white. So it's not going to garner as much attention as it would if it was reversed. And that's messed up. It's messed up. And it is. And I can honestly say that, being in the middle of being as somebody that's been messed with by police officers and been harassed and had family members harassed by police officers, but in now being a police officer and being on the other end of it, I can honestly come out and say, no, it is messed up that, a lot of these officers, these white officers that are out there doing their job for the right reasons, are getting messed with simply because they are doing their job against a person of color who is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so it's a frustrating situation, because I see it from both sides, but at the same time, it's so wrong to be demonizing a lot of these officers out here who are good men, which I'm sure, Christina's husband is. So Christina, let me ask you, so after this whole situation, how long was it, were you guys feeling pretty comfortable at first when they were initially, everything was, the whole investigation, everything kind of played out and then kind of just went by the wayside, or no?
Well, we had protesters, gosh, and Anthony, I'm so sad to hear that you had a similar experience. We had protesters show up at our home that same night, and our information went viral as well. So not only our home address, but our family's home address, all of our social media accounts, like our phone numbers. It was so invasive. It got so big, so ugly, so nasty, so fast. And it's like, I know in my heart, the belief system that our marriage is based on. I know what's in my husband's heart. And it's like, for the narrative to get so wrong, so big, so fast, it was incredulous for me as a police wife. I was shocked that people could jump to wrong conclusions about my husband's character, kind of like you said, just because he's wearing a badge and he's white. So that was really hard. So we were kind of in crisis and survival mode immediately. But we knew never once did we question use of force. Like you touched on, it so low level. And my husband is so by the book and so convicted in his training and beliefs and experience as a police officer. We knew we were not afraid of the use of force investigation. So my husband's situation happened on a Wednesday. I think that Friday or Saturday were those protests I was telling you about. And immediately after the city burned down, leaders approached us with a 6-figure settlement offer to get Matthew to resign voluntarily. And again, he was so rooted in his confidence on my use of force was within policy. I didn't do anything wrong. And his biggest love and passion and purpose in life is being a police officer. So we didn't want to take that resignation deal because we knew that might be kind of the end of his law enforcement career. It would look like he was resigning in lieu of termination. So he really leaned into the use of force investigation, and that was cleared. And we never saw them coming at us with an allegation of dishonesty. So I guess to answer your question, we were very confident about the use of force, but just never, we were a newer police family when this all happened. Matthew had been on the force for about 3 years. So while my eyes are open now, at the time last year, I never knew that, allegations of dishonesty can be a tool for command staff to use when they want to force someone out, right? So never saw it coming, never saw that attack coming, unfortunately.
Let me ask you, how long was the time period from the allegations being thrown out to now he was forced out because of the dishonesty?
Immediate. So the investigation happened in June, and in July it concluded, and that's when we found out about the sustained allegations of dishonesty. And then they fired him in August. And then for us, that touches off an appeals process that was many months. So we have like an appeals hearing between October and December of 2020, where we're kind of, appealing their decision. And then it was, I think early January is when the DA filed charges. So it was kind of like a 6-month span of us like fighting this, just completely shocked and blown away that they would allege something so false and so unfounded. And then kind of, one of the things our eyes was opened up to is like the way that this appeals process is designed in the city. It's very anti-employee. I think you're in California, Ryan, so you might know the threshold for these IAs, these workplace investigations, are so low and so ambiguous. So during that 6-month process that I was just talking about, it was kind of a eye-opening experience for us as a police family that if it is politically convenient for command staff to get rid of you, for city leaders to get rid of you, the system is designed in a way where they can. It is easy for them to do. So that's been...
Can I ask a question? I'm not in law enforcement, so I don't know as much. So who does who gives the allegations and who pursues him? Is it people within the police department or is it city officials?
I'm happy to speak to what happened in our experience. It might be different at different departments, but traditionally, there is an internal department. It's called IA, or Internal Affairs. They conduct these investigations. But in La Mesa, the way it's structured is it's a city PD, right? So the chief and the captains all report to the city manager, the mayor, the city council, who's very anti-police in La Mesa. And so when this video goes viral, they decree that this is going to be handled by an outside investigative firm. And that's important to call out because La Mesa essentially pays this firm to do this investigation, which means they're a paying customer. So La Mesa goes to this firm and says, it's a use of force investigation, but look at these other things. Here's our theory. And it's, in this case, they paid the firm $75,000 to find exactly what they wanted to find. these like unfounded allegations of officer dishonesty. So that's really important to call out that it should have been handled internally. These normally are, but because it was a politically charged case, La Mesa needed to control the investigative findings so that they could have what they needed to force Matthew out.
So let me ask you this, Christina, because this obviously went from being, hey, it's already bad because it's a viral video, protesters at my house, but whatever. It gets thrown out. You guys, for a second, I'm sure, were probably like, okay, cool. Use of force is thrown out. We just got to ride the wave of the external fallout. But then it gets worse because now they're offering you, I'm sure you guys thought something like they're offering us a settlement for a reason. They resign, but it gets worse because now they file charges against them for felony, like criminal charges, right? And so I'm sure you guys didn't see that coming. Am I correct in saying that?
No, we had seen that come. We did not see it coming. We had heard rumors like in the fall that there might be like a perjury charge coming through. And the conversation around that was like, this is unfounded. This is wild. Never would this ever stick. But again, like one of the things my eyes have been opened up to is kind of that relationship that's there between command staff and local politicians like the district attorney. And so, you've got a lot of like cowering or bowing to the mob happening in our case, but I would argue like nationwide. And so you have like La Mesa coming out with these findings, right? Saying like, we got rid of the bad guy. He's the scapegoat. Our city burned down and this is the person to be mad at. And we got rid of him. And so it's kind of like they kick the can down the road. They fire him like the mob demanded. And now the mob also demanded criminal charges. So if La Mesa fires him and then the DA doesn't file charges, then the mob's going to target the DA, who is an elected official. So it's kind of interesting that like this politicking that's really at play here.
Yeah, and we've seen that, not to this degree, but we've seen that nationwide where cities who have experienced riots have hired outside law enforcement or law firms to investigate the officers that they sent into the area to control these violent rioters. And you're exactly right. So like if I own a law firm and the city of Cleveland comes to me and goes, hey, here's $200,000. These are the 5 officers I want you to investigate. And this is exactly what you're investigating. Chances are exactly what they're looking for is going to pop up. That's just the reality of the world that we live in. So then once I find whatever they wanted me to find and I write it up and I send it over to whoever, I send it over to the DA knows the mayor. They already had a conversation, so he's already on board. He writes it up, and then the judges are politicians as well, so they know they're in the loop. The attorney's office, they're in the loop with everything going on as well. So it's an ugly process, and I wish I could say that this is the first conversation I've had like this. Once again, not to this degree, but I've seen this and I've heard of this happen in cities nationwide. The exact same thing.
Let me ask you, Christina, could you, I don't know if you're at leisure to share with us. If you can't, then all good. But if you can, I want to know what were they saying that he lied about in his police report?
Yeah. So essentially it boils down to observations in his police report. So specifically smoking, right? So when Matthew was at the trolley station, he observed a hand-to-face motion from a distance that the subject was doing. So that's consistent with smoking. That's what drew him to the person. This hand-to-face motion was also observed by another witness in the investigation. So it's important to kind of like to just paint you a picture of why this is so unfounded. It's like that was his initial observation, and you all are law enforcement officers, so you can kind of speak to what I'm about to say next. But it's like he approaches the subject. He says, hey, man, you can't smoke here. And the person denies smoking. Matthew doesn't see any evidence of smoking. So he moves on in the conversation and says, what are you doing here? And the guy says, well, I live here. And Matthew goes, oh, okay, what apartment? And the guy goes, oh, no, I don't live here. And Matthew's like, okay, well, to be on this property, you have to have a trolley pass. Do you have a trolley pass? And he goes, no. And so it's like this idea, this dynamic of like, was he smoking? Was he not? It's irrelevant because this person was detained for not having a trolley pass on MTS property, and they were arrested for assaulting a police officer. So, it's kind of like people that on the outside that see this case, like it's really easy for them to dig their heels and be like, well, he lied about smoking. There's no proof he lied. It was an honest observation that he saw that was corroborated by another witness. And that observation also has nothing to do with why this person was detained or arrested. But the community doesn't have that type of nuanced understanding of what policing is. And so it's really easy for them to see a clickbait headline about this and be like, oh, well, the officer lied. And it's like, no, peer in. Like, this is a sham case against a cop who had no history of discipline at the department. So it's things like that, allow these city PDs to really hem up a cop in the court system if they want to. And it's just, it's outrageous that this is the treatment for law enforcement officers in California, at least.
So was he detained? Oh, my bad. Real quick. Was he detained before the smoking motion, or was the smoking motion is what drew him to? Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason
chronology. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, thank you for calling that out. Chronology is so important. It's the smoking observation was something Matthew saw from a distance. He approaches the guy, tells him he can't smoke there. The guy says he's not smoking. Matthew moves on in the conversation. Eventually gets to the part where this person does not have a trolley pass, so he's detained. So that's the chronology of events.
And the reason that's so important, and so if you're listening to this, the sequence of events of how we stop and detain people is so important, because it can get thrown. Let me give you guys a little bit of an example. If Billy went and shot somebody and kill, I keep using Billy, but if Billy went and shot somebody and killed somebody, and I unlawfully stop and detain him, and I conduct this investigation, but from the jump of when I start this investigation, I start doing all this unlawful stuff. The mere fact that whatever Billy did can get thrown out because I didn't lawfully stop him in the correct way. So it wasn't a lawful detention. And so when you go to court and things, start going back and forth, if you don't have a lawful reason to stop and detain somebody, then everything else that comes after that can get thrown out. So you can almost negate the fact of certain evidence that's collected or whatever it may be if it wasn't right from the jump. So that's why I ask these questions, because sequence is important. The other thing to understand is all you need to detain a person is reasonable suspicion. And what's reasonable suspicion is belief that a crime has occurred, is about to occur, or is occurring in your presence. Those are the only three things you need to detain somebody. If you believe that a crime has occurred, if you believe the crime is about to occur, or if you see a crime that you believe is occurring in your presence, that's so broad. It's so broad. Yeah. I mean, you can detain. Go ahead, AJ.
It sounds like he wasn't even detained. Like, it sounds like he thought he was smoking, walked over and was like, hey, you can't smoke in here, dude. And the guy was like, well, I'm not. The officer was like, oh, I don't see any cigarettes or anything. Let's continue to have this conversation. He was free to walk away at any point. At some point, he voluntarily told the officer, no, I don't have a trolley pass, which, boom, that's enough.
There's your detention.
At that point. And
which is a crime has occurred.
Yeah. And just for our viewers and listeners, I want to just touch on a little bit more of what Ryan was talking about. It's called Fruits of a Poisonous Tree. So if Billy's walking down the street and I thought I saw him jaywalk, right, which is illegal, I walk up and I'm like, hey, you jaywalk? He's like, no, I didn't. I'm like, yes, you did. I end up in his pockets and I find like a bunch of dope. That dope could be tossed out because I illegally detained him. That's irrelevant in this case because the officer thought he saw something, walked over, had a conversation with him. The guy was like, no. The officer at the same time was probably like, oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't. Let's continue to have this mutual conversation. So, yeah, that's the fact that they're trying to make the fact that he puts, he was in there smoking such a big deal, or not even trying to, they made it such a big deal is absolutely mind-blowing.
And even though it may seem like ticky-tack or frivolous to you, it still gives officers reasons to detain people. Like, that's what cracks me up is like, I'll detain somebody for riding their bike on a sidewalk. You can't stop me. I'm just riding my bike. Well, yeah, it's a muni code to be riding your bicycle on the sidewalk in the city that I work in. You're detained. Yeah, it may seem frivolous, but it gives me lawful reason to detain you. There's so many things that we can detain you. You're pushing a shopping cart. Well, I can detain you for pushing a shopping cart because you're not supposed to be. That's theft of a shopping cart. So, yeah. Or it could be theft of a shopping cart. Go ahead.
If Christine, if you don't mind me asking, where are you at now? And I don't want to jump too far ahead, Ryan, but where are you at now with everything?
Yes. So right now we had our preliminary hearing last month, which was actually excellent for us because the testimonies to come out of prelim, like the DA's own witnesses, their testimonies were excellent for us. And so I don't know if I touched on this before, but Matthew is also backed by substantial case law as a police officer. So it was positive in that we got to get all that on the record. But as you guys know, the threshold for probable cause in preliminary hearings is so low. So the judge held us to answer. So right now we're appealing that judge's decision to hold this over for trial. So if we're successful with that appeal, the criminal case will get dropped, which is the direction it absolutely should go. But then beyond that, like there's the admin case, right? So we need to also appeal the city of La Mesa's decision to terminate Matthew. So that there's like 2 tracks of it. So that will go before a Superior Court judge later this year. So there's like 2 major hurdles that we have to clear.
So Christina, I have to tell you this. I have to tell you this story, and I hope that it kind of like helps you and your husband get through this time. So about 5 to 6 years ago, my church contacted me and they were like, hey, can you work security for somebody that we're bringing in to speak to the congregation? So I'm like, yeah, I help out with the church all the time. Come to find out, it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter, Bernice King. So I was following her around the church. We were having like all sorts of like really good conversations. At one point we were sitting down and we're breaking bread together. We're having lunch together, right? Like I'm literally sitting right beside her. We're having like awesome conversation, and something that she said completely rocked my world because I just never thought about it. And I'm really called to share this with you right now. I was just talking about like how her father is an inspiration in my life. How I've always like turned to like his speeches and like the way that he maneuvered through life and like faced adversity to help me along my journey and to help me like reach further and do more things. And she broke down what she saw and why her father is who he is today, and that reason was his wife. And the way that she broke that down, she's like, look, like my father was hated. Like no one loved my father. No one really knew who he was, like outside of the Black culture and et cetera. And the reason why he is the person that he is today is the work that my wife did after he passed. Like the struggles that I seen her go through, the adversity that she had to face in proving to the world exactly who he is. So I just want to share that story with you because it really changed the way that I look at my wife and that I just look at females in general. You have it hard, Christina, but I'm so proud of you for doing what you're doing, because you're not only fighting for what's right, like you're fighting for your husband's legacy and for what's right in that relationship. And if Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife can fight and make him the person that he is today, the person that we look to, the person that the world knows, then just imagine the work that you're doing.
That's good, AJ.
So don't stop doing what you're doing. Don't let these politicians, don't let these people who are just downright evil deter you from your mission. Like you were put in this position for a reason, and you're doing a really good job at it. Just continue that fight. And if there's anything we could do on this podcast or our listeners, I'm telling you right now, like I don't know who's all listening to this right now, but I know our fan base, they will help as well. So don't let that deter you at all. If anything, use that as motivation along your journey. And the second thing that I want to share with you is, and I'm sorry because I'm kind of getting like worked up just talking about this, is you guys are going through this for a reason. I don't know what that reason looks like, and it sucks. And there's no real way around that. And you may not know what that reason is ever, but just know that it's for a reason. I've been placed in a lot of situations where I'm like, man, this sucks. Like, why am I going through this? And we'll just use the protesters as a example, right? Like, the protests got so bad and so violent and sketchy around my house that there was a point where I moved my bed away from the window because I was afraid someone was going to start ringing shots through the bedroom window where me and my wife sleep. And it affected my sleep. Like I was losing sleep. I started like drinking more, like there was just a lot that like went into this whole thing mentally. But when I came out, I was able to share this story and share this testimony with so many other officers who were struggling with something similar. And in hopes to help them through the same thing. So in hindsight, I'm glad that I went through it because I came out okay. Like I know that God knew that I would be strong enough to come out of this, not only okay, but with the mentality to share this in hopes to encourage others as well. And I believe that that may be the situation that you're in right now. So I know the storm is bad. I know that like things are really, really hard right now, but you're doing an amazing job.
Yep.
Don't stop.
Yep.
And at some point, the light switch is going to go
Yep.
from off to on, and the lights are going to come on and you go, I get it now.
Yep, absolutely.
I get it now. I get why we went through such a horrible time. It is for this, whatever this is.
That was so powerful. Thank you for saying that. And it's so timely too, because just the other night we were talking about like, this is constant agony for us, but we're people of faith and we know we were chosen for this path for whatever reason. And we talk about it a lot in terms of like these last 16 months, I said earlier, it's like a hellfire acid bath. They have been atrociously painful for our family. And yet through our greatest pain, God has done some of his most incredible transformative work. Heck yes, I am fighting for the truth to come out about my husband, to clear his name, for victory for him, but also so we can turn right back around and everything we've learned, you know, our purpose, we really feel is to help other law enforcement families. So
there you go. There you go.
Go ahead, AJ.
I was just going to say, don't forget, prayer without works is dead. So like, it's one thing to pray about it. It's one thing to be like faithful about it, but like you have to put in the work as well, which is exactly what you're doing. And I applaud you. Like, I know I said it and I know I'm like seeming somewhat repetitive right now. But I applaud you. I'm very proud of the work that you're doing. And I'm very honored to have you on the podcast to share your story.
So I have one last question for you, Christina, and then this is actually going to kind of bring me into the last point that I want to make, which is kind of along the lines of what AJ was saying right now. The question I have for you is, does this make you look at law enforcement through a different lens? Because you're in a unique spot. You're in a unique spot because the thing that your husband, all he wanted to do and sign up for, almost essentially turned his back on him. And it gives you a unique perspective, because there's always people like, oh, you know, law enforcement is this, law enforcement is that. But I think in many ways, law enforcement needs major improvements, but not in the areas that the community thinks, and vice versa. And so has your perspective of the profession of law enforcement changed throughout this situation? And then I'm going to, whatever you say, I'm going to wrap it up with my final point.
Yes. My answer is, I always assumed as a police wife, the threat to my husband was in the field, right? I always thought that's where the danger was. And this experience has shown me that, you know, the war on cops is real. I don't think that's anything new, but what I've learned through this experience is that war on cops is now, I think, expanded to weak command leadership, to city leaders with a political agenda, to politicians, you know, with this anti-cop rhetoric. So I would say my view on policing has changed in that way, and that my eyes are wide open as a police wife, that the threat is all around us. And it's very important to speak out and to kind of rally with the law enforcement community so that we can call out the political railroading that's happening to my husband and to other officers throughout the community. And by kind of exposing this corruption and this collusion, we can help prevent that from happening to other law enforcement families. So that's kind of like my new perspective, my new lens that I've been seeing the profession with through this experience.
That's good. I have a friend of mine, one of my best friends. He was in my wedding and everything. He's gone through, I don't want to say a similar situation, but it's similar in the fact that he's an officer and there were criminal charges placed against him for something that was completely blown out of proportion, and saw the same system work against him, very similar to your husband. And this happened, I want to say, almost 4 years ago. So he's been on this train for 4 years now, if not a little bit longer. And it's been terrible to have to see, but it kind of brings my point to this, is that, like, you know, a lot of times people don't understand the pressures that are plaguing officers are coming from both ends. It's like there's this huge idea that law enforcement protects its own, and we stand up for the brotherhood. But let me tell you, I've been in this profession long enough to know that when somebody's butt is up against the fire, law enforcement will also turn on their own many times. And that's a sad thing to say, but it's true. So for all those people that think like, oh, no, it's a brotherhood and they do this and that. No, like we face pressures all over the place. It takes one incident like it did for Officer Degas to get into that was blown out of proportion for everything to come crumbling down, which leads me to my last point is this. Me and my wife, as we were going to bed last night, I was doing my devotion. And, AJ said something earlier. He said, everything happens for a reason. We all say, I've said that a lot of times. But one of the things that God just kind of put on my heart last night as I'm going to bed, it was like, God could have had me been born. Like he could have birthed me in any generation. It could have been 100 years ago, centuries ago, like my soul, like our souls, right? Like I could have been born during the civil rights movement. I could have been born during the Jesus movement. Like I could have been born so many different times throughout the earth. You know what I mean? Like I don't know what I'm trying to say, but my point is that I was born at this time for a reason. Like it's in the book of Esther, and I've talked about this before, where it says, for such a time as this. And so I told my wife last night, I was like, what's so fascinating is that God designed every single one of us to be born during this generation for a reason. It wasn't by happenstance. It wasn't just because, my parents got together and they made me, but no, God designed that way. He said, no, I want Ryan to be born and live through this generation for a reason. And so what it brought me back to is that no, when we say that everything happens for a reason, like that is one of the most truest statements. It's up to us to go and figure out what our purpose of life is. And for you guys are going through some trials and tribulations, no doubt about it, but there is a reason for such a time as this, because there are things that need to come out. This system needs to get better. There's people that need to be exposed, and God chose your husband. God chose you as being his faithful stewards in going out there and completing his work. Paul, the Apostle Paul, was, one of the things that I love about the Apostle Paul is that dude faced so much affliction. He was in jail. He was tormented. He was whipped. He was beat, all these different things. And he still did it with gratitude and with grace and with mercy and with a good attitude, because he knew that God put him on this earth for a reason. And he ended up becoming one of the strongest apostles to ever live. And so I encourage you, Christina, I implore you and your husband to continue to stay in this fight. Fight the good fight, because it's for a reason, for such a time as this. Like there are so many different changes. We talk about police reform, we talk about this and that, but there's definitely a reform that needs to happen. But you guys onto the path of doing the reform that is needed, the reform that's necessary for society right now, for this profession. And so I just want to encourage you, just like AJ did, because it's not easy. And I just want to, if my wife listens to this, what she typically does, I want to thank her, because you guys, even Billy's wife, AJ's wife, all of our wives, you guys are the backbone. We just so happen to be the face, you know what I mean? And that's where God has us or whatever. But you guys are the ones that are the backbones. Like I would not be me without my wife. Like my wife is phenomenal. I'm traveling to Dallas this week on Friday. I was in Virginia 2 weeks ago. I was in Washington last week, and it just on and on and on and on. But I wouldn't be able to do those things without a strong wife. So I want to encourage you, keep doing what you're doing, keep battling this hard fight. But I guarantee you it will work out in the end. And shoot, look how God works. I mean, AJ's been through something similar, and God is already using him to be able to speak life into somebody that's going through the same fire right now.
Christina, what can we do?
Amen. Well, I think that right now we need our army of supporters like both of you standing with us now more than ever before. So there's an Instagram account, Clear Officer Degas. That's D as in David, AGES. So Clear Officer Degas on Instagram. Go there, follow. There's case updates that you can tune in for. There's tons of easy ways that you can kind of join us in this fight to defend my husband, the police officer, but also to stick up for and advocate for law enforcement in general. So Clear Officer Degas on Instagram.
Thank you. We'll definitely, so make sure you guys follow her. I've been following Christina and that page for a while now, and I know you've done some work with Brandon Tatum too, right?
Officer Tatum is an amazing ally for us. He's actually done a couple of videos advocating for our case on YouTube, which are wonderful. And our Instagram is comprised with all types of stuff that back up what I'm saying. I'm not just speaking out blindly. Everything I say, there's video testimony. There's other people of influence that have spoken out in our defense. So cannot thank you guys enough for having me on here and helping to tell my story. It makes all the difference. And I'm so passionate about getting the truth out there about this case.
Perfect. Yeah. If you guys have followed my page too, I mean, I did a video a while back for them. They just kind of compared the fact of how we utilize or why we use controlling force on people. And I compared it with two different examples, but I bring that up just to say, like, she has there is so much valid reasoning and points. I would not just bring her onto this podcast if I truly didn't believe in my heart, like, hey, no, there's something more to this onion that's being put out there like that. So I truly believe, like, there's going to be good that comes out of this, and then Bible backs it up. The Bible backs it up. Your spirit backs it up. So the Bible says, good things happen to those who love Christ. And so that's going to happen. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pray for you right now, AJ and everybody else. They're going to be here with us. And again, just make sure you guys follow her, Officer Degas, or Clear Officer Degas on Instagram. And anything you need from us, Christina, just let us know. I want to be an advocate for you. And the last thing I do is, if you're a law enforcement leader, please listen to this podcast and please take this to heart. Please take it to heart. You guys, don't get me wrong. I understand you guys are under the fire a lot right now because everybody looks to the law enforcement leadership anytime something goes bad. But don't forget who you guys were sworn. Yeah, we were sworn to protect the people on the streets, but you were also sworn to protect the people of your organization. And if those people deserve protection for rightful reasons, you got to stand firm in that, even though it's hard. But don't crumble. Don't crumble. That's what makes you a leader. And so if I implore you as a law enforcement leader listening to this, I'm a leader in my own type of way, but man, like, we have jobs to do to keep and protect the people at our organization safe. If they do something wrong, if they screw up, by all means, we'll throw them out there and they will meet their judgment. But if these people are doing the right things for the right reasons with honest hearts and intentions, back them up. Back them up. Because we already have it tough on one end dealing with people that don't have trust in us. It makes it that much tougher when the own leadership that we go out there and hit the streets for doesn't even back us up. So I hope this resonates with you. Send this to your other law enforcement leaders out there, and make sure you guys develop your own coalition to stand up for the men and women of your organizations. And so with that, I'm going to lead us in a prayer. So dear Heavenly Father, we come before you, and I just ask that you would just bless Christina and her husband, Matthew. They are going through some tough times right now, Lord Jesus. They're going through some tough times, and we know that everything happens for a reason, like we said that on this podcast today. We know that through life we're all faced with different different adversities, trials, and tribulations, and things like that. But we know that you've also equipped us to be strong in going through those. And so I ask that you continue to give them the strength, continue to give them the wisdom to navigate these choppy waters, especially during the tough times when it doesn't seem like there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I ask that you just give them the restoration, restore him to something better than what he was before, and his wife, Lord Jesus, Christina. I ask that you would, your word says that you would give them the peace that will guard their hearts. And so I ask that you would give them peace right now and allow it to guard their heart, so that way they would not be intimidated by anybody, and just know that at the end of the day, you are in control, and that your will supersede anybody else's will. So we love you. We thank you. And I ask that you would give them hope, give them joy, give them life, give them everything in abundance, Lord Jesus, just for them being obedient to you in their walk. So we love you and thank you for it in your son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
And if you're somebody that's gone through a similar situation at your department, we would love to hear from you. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in our profession. Like I said, I'm all about law enforcement reform. So there's just right ways to do it. So any last closing thoughts for us, Christina, before we hop off?
I just love the work. My family and I are such big fans of what you both do with this podcast. So bless you both. And thank you so much for allowing us to tell our story today.
Absolutely. The honor was ours.
Anytime. So give us good feedback. Give us a 5-star rating, 5-star review if you guys like what we're putting out. Again, we may not always agree, but at least we can have these honest conversations with one another. So make sure you guys tune in, send this podcast to your family, your friends, and so that way we can continue to grow and change things because it's needed. So we love y'all, and we'll see y'all next week. Peace.